The learning outcome for this module is to understand how to make high-quality decisions when you have limited information. Let's get started.
We're going to be discussing the action steps for making high-quality decisions when you only have limited information. And this, is something that we all deal with essentially on a daily basis in both our family lives and our professional lives. The first step is to know when to act. When you're making important decisions, it's usually impossible to acquire all of the information that you think you need, no matter what you're dealing with. Sometimes you have a lot of information, sometimes you feel more comfortable, but it's impossible to have all of the answers to the questions that you have. However, you can still make a good decision based on the information you do have. Even when you have a very small data set to deal with, you can still make a good decision. When you're in a space or you're in a position where you feel like you have limited information, you can ask yourself a couple of questions that can move you forward. These include, what's the best time frame in which to make the decision? What are the disadvantages of waiting to make a decision? And what's the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen if you make a wrong decision? By answering those questions, you will be able to take yourself forward pretty quickly when you're dealing with limited information. And if you feel like you're still being sort of gripped by paralysis, like, oh my gosh, what if I make the wrong decision? Or what if I don't have enough information to really take this forward? Force yourself to make one low-risk decision earlier than you'd like to. Even if you're super uncomfortable, force yourself to make one low-risk decision and then look at the consequences of it. And ask yourself, was the outcome successful of my decision, even though I didn't have the information? And then, really answer that question for yourself. If the outcome was successful or it was acceptable, did you hit it out of the park, or was it mediocre, or was it a failure? If in any of those scenarios, you have the opportunity to say, how could I have done that better? The next thing to consider is to actually make decisions, something we call ready, aim, fire. When you're forced with this situation where you don't have a lot of information, think about what the ideal solution might look like. And what makes it ideal in your mind? Then brainstorm a list of criteria that you could use to pick the best solution, using simply this limited data set that you have. When you have this nice brainstorm list, a lot of potential options in front of you, don't continue to research once additional information isn't yielding or telling you anything new. Because you want to remember that it's, we take a step, we ready, we aim, and then we fire. We don't just continue to aim. We don't want to continue to think about it. You want to actually make a decision. Another way to get yourself to the decision-making point is called the decision two-step. First, you make a preliminary decision based on the available information that you have. And then, secondly, decide on what other information you could collect to test the soundness of that preliminary decision. So say, okay, look, we're gonna go with option A, and move down that path, and then make sure that you're gathering other sources of information that will either support or detract from that decision. Lastly, it's important to manage your fear. If you're still resisting making a decision, ask yourself, could fear be preventing you from acting? If this isn't likely the case, consider whether making a decision is actually necessary or advisable, because if you're feeling fear around it, if you're feeling real concern around this, maybe now is not a good time to make a decision. Ask yourself questions like, again, around the time frame, like, what if you waited a day? Or what if you waited a week or a month to make this decision? What would happen? How would things change? Would it really affect what's going on with your team or your business? Also, ask yourself, is there something that I don't know that it's critical to making the decision? Is there a massively critical piece of information that's missing? And if there is, how could you get that information? What would you need to do? Do you need to buy something? Do you need to get a committee together? Do you need to find a report? Do you need to, do some more analysis? The key thing here is that the underlying message is that fear is very rarely a reason to not make a decision. Usually we, as leaders, we're just placed in a position where we have to go with it and we have to make the best decision based on the information we have available. So while decisions can be difficult to make, fear is not a good reason to not do this.
We hope you found this module on determined decisions useful. Remember, there's a complete transcript of this video below, and there's downloadable takeaways that you can use offline. Also, please take a minute to leave us a comment about how you're making better determined decisions today, or leave us a comment about how we can make this section better. Thank you.